Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Steven here with Team Euphoric, and this is day 8 of the 80 Days to Your Dream Body course. Today's protein source is going to be beef, short ribs, and today's going to be a legs and abs training routine. And the theme for today's video is structural balance for improved athletic performance. So right now, I'm going to be teaching you how to perform a stability assessment on your athletes. Let's get started. And while we're resting, I'm going to be teaching you some assessments to assess your athlete's stability. First is going to be the CLAT test, and this is a terrific test for assessing an athlete's ability to change directions quickly, as well as see how their body reacts to ground reaction forces. We are going to need an aerobic stepper and some risers, and at the maximum height, we're just going to need it to reach mid-shin. We don't need any higher than that. I have a couple of risers already set up, but you would want to start with just the stepper by itself, and then add one riser at a time. You would instruct the patient to go ahead and get onto the platform. You would want them to flex the hip between 5 to 15 degrees. That way it doesn't end up hitting the floor. And you would ask them to clasp their hands together. From this position, you would then instruct them to step off of the platform and land 3 to 4 inches in front of the platform and stick the landing. Now, what are we looking for this test? If they end up going into a valgus knee after they land, that can indicate weakness in the vastus medialis. If they have a medial hop or pronation of the foot, that could indicate weakness in the adductors. If they end up having excessive hip flexion, that could indicate weakness in the gluteus maximus muscle. If they land and have an anterior hop, that could indicate weakness in the hamstrings. If they have an anteromedial hop, meaning they're going forward on a diagonal to the inside, that could indicate weakness in the semimembranosus and the adductors. If they end up having some type of lateral trunk flexion, could indicate weakness in the QL. And if they end up having a lateral hop or supination of the foot, then that could indicate weakness of the gluteus medius. With regard to this test, you would keep going until you see 2 faults. If you notice 1 fault, keep going. Once you reach mid-shin height, if you haven't seen 1 or 2 faults, you automatically stop the test. You don't keep going. But next, we're going to get into the rocker board test. For the rocker board test, obviously, we are going to need a rocker board. And what we would want to do for this one is just assist the patient on the rocker board. Once they are nice and stable, you could take your arm off of their shoulder, and then you would just instruct them to squat as low as they can and try to keep the rocker board nice and level, and then just come right back up. What are we looking for this one? Well, if they have excessive hip flexion, it could be a weak glute max. If they end up going into valgus knees, it could indicate weak vastus medialis. If they have an ipsilateral hip elevation, it could indicate weakness in the QL. If they have excessive spinal flexion, it could be weakness in the quads. And if they have valgus or externally rotated feet below 90 degrees, it could indicate weakness in the medial hip rotators. But time is up. Set number 4. And while we're resting, we have 2 more assessments to test for stability. The first is going to be the wobble board test. And I forgot to mention this, but for all of the tests, you want to be standing on a 45-degree angle when you are observing your client. But with regard to the wobble board test, this is going to be great for assessing VMO and hip function. VMO being the vastus medialis obliquus, or the oblique fibers of the VMO, the vastus medialis. First thing that we want to do is we are going to instruct the patient to put their hands on their hips. We want them to get the center of their arch over the wobble board. And then what we would do for this one is just have them get back. And we would want to instruct them to go into a split squat so that their hams touch their calves on a 4:01:0 tempo. So you're going to come down for 4 seconds, touch, and then come back up for 1 second. With regard to this one, what are we looking for? Well, if they end up going into a valgus knee, that could indicate weakness in the vastus medialis oblique fibers, or it could indicate weakness in the medial hip rotators. If they end up going into excessive dorsiflexion, so the toes are pointing up, then that could indicate weakness in the quadriceps. If they go into excessive plantar flexion, that could indicate weakness in the gluteus maximus. If they end up going into excessive hip or trunk flexion, it could also indicate weakness in the gluteus maximus. If they end up going into lateral trunk flexion, it can indicate weakness in the QL, the quadratus lumborum. And if they end up going into ipsilateral torso rotation, so they're rotating toward the side that they are testing, that could indicate weakness in the gluteus medius muscle. And then lastly, a vertical shin could indicate weakness in the hamstrings. Next, we want to go ahead and we are going to perform the sit-fit test. For the sit-fit test, I'm going to be using a Jasmine cushion. You could use whatever air-filled cushion you like, but this is going to be great for assessing the actual ankle. With regard to this one right over here, what we want to do is the same thing. We're going to have them place the foot on the center, so the center of the arch over the center of the cushion. We want them to rotate the foot out 15 degrees. You want the hands on the hips, and then you're going to instruct them to do the same thing. They're going to do a split squat on a 4:01:0 tempo, and then come up. And they want to try and keep it as level as possible. If they end up going into excessive supination, that can indicate weakness in the ankle pronators. If they go into excessive pronation, that could indicate weakness in the ankle supinators. If they go into excessive plantar flexion, that could indicate weakness in the gluteus maximus muscle. And if they end up going into excessive dorsiflexion, that could indicate weakness in the quadriceps muscles. But time is up. Set number 5. Thanks for sticking around until the end of the video. Be sure to like, share, and leave a comment as it'll help the algorithm. And if you enjoyed the content, show your support by subscribing to the channel by clicking on the icon in the bottom right corner. And if you really want to show your support, then consider becoming a member by clicking on the icon in the bottom left corner. These new high-quality videos aren't cheap to edit, and the $5 membership will really help with the video editing budget. You'll also get access to a ton of exclusive perks like early access to videos and this program design lecture playlist in the top right-hand corner. And if you want to learn how to do a one-armed pull-up, then check out the playlist on the top left corner.